The Canada Ponzi Plan. Defined benefit pensions are antiquated, inherently unstable. There has been an unexpected silver lining to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's pursuit of a provincial pension system proposed by her in fall 2023. The messiness of the potential departure from the Canada Pension Plan, CPP, which already excludes Quebec, has laid bare that the CPP is a pay-as-you-go Ponzi scheme. Even CPP apologists and administrators admit recipients depend not on their investments and returns, but on fresh taxes paid by newcomers. The fear-mongering and deception from the Prime Minister should be a red flag and hasten Alberta's departure. Quote, "The harm it would cause is undeniable," unquote, his open letter states. It is not, but precision of language is not his strong suit. The truth is that he intends to do, quote, "everything possible to ensure the CPP remains intact," unquote, because a province leaving would humiliate those who believe in central planning from Ottawa. A successful, cheaper alternative would also illuminate the mistreatment Alberta receives versus other provinces. Albertans would have to pay 40% less to the prospective Alberta pension plan, while other Canadians would have to pay 5% more to the CPP. As Tegan Hill of the Fraser Institute wrote in the Calgary Sun, quote, "The idea of a provincial pension plan grew from the frustration of Albertans, but with tangible benefits, it could actually become a reality," unquote. Hollow sustainability. Despite the CPP management organization, CPP Investments, touting the pension plan's sustainability, that is misleading at best. The CPP has dug itself into a hole with a massive unfunded liability of at least $1.14 trillion. This means the present value of promises made in excess of assets on hand to pay for those promises. If newcomers could opt out and not be suckers paying for current recipients, the CPP would go belly up in a few years. In the long run, however, those paying in dig the hole deeper because they generate even more unfunded liabilities. That means higher immigration, even if it helps the CPP limp on for a bit longer with an aging population, fails to address the structural problem. Immigration is a short-term band-aid trotted out by those with a lack of concern for the plight of the next generation. In fact, the CPP unfunded liability is way more than $1 trillion, since the reported number uses an accounting trick in its calculations. The latest actuarial report also makes the official estimate extremely difficult to find, so difficult that it must be deliberate. Chief Actuary Asiya Billig buried it deeply as a small footnote in Appendix C on page 187 out of 217 pages. The deceitful nature of the unfunded liability calculation stems from a pivotal assumption. A footnote on page 182 states that the present values are calculated using the, quote, "assumed overall rate of return on base CPP assets," unquote. There is some ambiguity here over the discount rate used, since it is not stated specifically. It could be the, quote, "rate of return assumption," quote, from the page 11 highlights, 5.79%, or one based on recent portfolio experience. The latter would be at least 10%, given an annualized compound nominal rate of 11.5% in the last reported decade, 2012 to 2021. Anyone working in finance knows that discount rates are game changers, especially over extended time periods. For example, let us assume that you are 50 years old and plan to retire in 20 years. At that time, you will receive a $500,000 annuity paying out $40,000 each year. What is that worth right now? If you were to discount it over 20 years at the 5.79% rate, its present value would be $162,210. Anyone with a calculator can run these numbers to verify what is written here. However, since CPP payments are supposed to be guaranteed and essentially riskless, as CPP proponents characterize them, a more appropriate discount rate would be 2 to 3%. That would be in line with Government of Canada bond yields in recent years. Discounting the $500,000 at a rate of 2.5% over 20 years gives a present value of $305,135, double the estimate with the faulty discount rate. While I do not have access to all the data for a thorough recalculation of the official $1.14 trillion, the actual unfunded liability could be well north of $2 trillion, given time horizons longer than 20 years. The $2 trillion figure exceeds $50,000 per capita, and it dwarfs the $1.2 trillion official national debt. The severity of the CPP debt means we should not be surprised that the official estimate is hidden and miscalculated. If they knew and understood the unfunded liability, younger generations and dynamic provinces would see the ruse and want to opt out immediately. The next best option would be for new entrants to participate on a defined contribution basis. The precise payments out would not be set in stone, but there would be zero new unfunded liabilities. Further, all CPP taxes from new participants as defined contributions could go to generating returns rather than paying for past participants and papering over unfunded liabilities. CPP proponents often poo-poo concerns about unfunded liabilities. However, sometimes the truth about the unfunded liability magnitude becomes politically salient, even for proponents. Consider what happened in 2020 when then Premier Jason Kenney proposed withdrawing Alberta from the CPP and leading a provincial alternative. Suddenly, the Alberta NDP found a federal internal treasury document that said Alberta alone would have to accept $133.1 billion in unfunded liabilities, its alleged share of the total. Tragically, the little CPP sustainability that exists rests more on an influential political lobby and entitlement mentality than on financials. As with Social Security in the United States, those who have paid taxes earmarked for a pension scheme expect to receive payments in their old age. They will lobby heavily to ensure they do, even if their money has long been spent while their children and grandchildren are struggling to buy homes and start families. At some point, this fiscal irresponsibility, coupled with entitlement, leads to a Puerto Rico-style default, but when that happens is anyone's guess. Rising awareness of the CPP's poor performance and politicization, which has driven Alberta's interest in leaving, means the program at the national level is on the precipice of crumbling. Albertans could save substantially by leaving, and even Ottawa's beloved CBC has reported that this, quote, could destabilize the fund entirely and increase incentives for British Columbia and Ontario to also leave the CPP, and to do it quickly, unquote. Good. A failing CPP would see the other provinces escape the sinking ship while they still can. What to prepare for? Canadians would be wise to anticipate 1. Higher CPP taxes, euphemistically called contributions. 2. Reduced CPP benefits via older retirement ages. And 3. A likely fragmentation into provincial programs. Canadians would best plan for alternatives and not assume the CPP will be there to bail them out. The precise nature of a fragmentation is difficult to predict. However, poorer Atlantic Canadian provinces would, in particular, struggle to maintain payments of current generosity. Even in corporate settings, defined benefit plans, in contrast to defined contribution plans, are shaky. Add short-sighted electoral politics, and you have a recipe for a downward spiral of goodies for votes charged to future taxpayers. The process has been underway for many years. Amid crippling cost of living increases, workers pay into the CPP more than 3 times the rate they paid at the program's genesis in 1966, which was 3.6% of an earnings band. The trend of higher CPP taxation is incessant. In 2023, the rate was 11.9%, and from 2024, an additional income band for CPP taxes will come into force, doubling in 2025. With bravado that is almost impressive, the Canadian government has the goal to call these higher taxes an enhancement. How anyone says that with a straight face, I do not know. Few escapes from poor performance. This would perhaps be comical if it were not so expensive and damaging to Canadians' financial health. Proponents might even wonder what the problem is with the CPP being a redistributive welfare program rather than a pension scheme. Ideological affinities lead them to gloss over poor performance. Since the lion's share of payments are mere transfers, the real returns on them have dwindled with each decade, now down to a paltry 2%. Gushy press releases from CPP investments parade a high rate of return on their invested assets, an annualized 10.9%. However, this is a distraction, since that is not what participants receive. CPP investments simply cannot deliver that sort of performance to participants, as would occur in a defined contribution plan, so long as most CPP taxes go to paying recipients and not to garnering returns. Bureaucratic mediocrity is typical of public pension plans around the world, which is to be expected since they hold a monopoly and need not compete. Coerced participation means these plans can get away with Ponzi scheme attributes in plain sight. In addition, public pension plans have been embarrassingly late to alternative asset classes such as venture capital. decades behind large endowments and corporate pension plans. On the other hand, rather than focusing on returns for participants, the CPP has led the charge towards net zero folly and the false god of ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors. Ian Madsen of the Frontier Center for Public Policy summarizes the topic well, quote, "Green virtue signaling ESG funds are a path to smaller pensions. Beware," unquote. Canadians have precious little available for independent saving, and they have rising retirement anxiety. Current retirees could have garnered substantially better results from private plans, yet they are supposed to be thankful for their mediocre and politically manipulated CPP payments. The CPP is an economic eyesore and albatross in the way of Canada's competitiveness. Those with the flexibility to do so would best avoid it. However, such people are few and far between. Aside from brief, informal workers and those working for foreign governments, exempt individuals tend to be Canadians who identify as First Nation Indians. Unfortunately, self-employment is not an exit strategy, as much as I wish it were. These individuals are forced to pay the full percentage explicitly, rather than having it half concealed when paid by employers. You can leave Canada altogether, and the good news is that at least whatever payments you have accumulated will go with you abroad. Those working in the United States, however, still fork out for Social Security. Delightful. The generational storm is here. 2 decades ago, one of my college instructors at Boston University wrote of a coming generational storm. Economist Lawrence Kotlikoff foresaw a younger generation hobbled with obligations to the retiring baby boom generation. That storm has arrived in Canada, and it is even worse than what he described. Under the weight of the CPP, among other albatrosses such as so-called equalization, the younger generation are struggling and eyeing an exit. A 2019 study by the Fraser Institute found that rising CPP tax rates directly reduce the private savings of Canadians. One justification offered for an expanded CPP, a policy established at the end of the last century, was that Canadians did not save enough for retirement. However, every additional dollar that they have allocated into CPP is a dollar they have removed from private investments such as registered retirement saving plans. This is not a new insight. In 1997, the International Monetary Fund warned of the CPP's adverse effects on output and capital formation. The pay-as-you-go pension scheme, which rests on intergenerational redistribution and distortionary taxes, was noticeably reducing aggregate savings and labor supply. Quote, "Either the baby boom generation will face much lower retirement benefits than its parents did, or its children will pay sharply higher taxes," unquote. Unfortunately, the latter has come to pass. The CPP unfunded liability has also grown so vast now that going cold turkey is off the table, and it would require a legislative overhaul. The best Canadians can hope for is for provinces to opt out and offer better deals. Provincial competition is healthy and would be markedly better than a one-size-fits-all approach from Ottawa.